Se encuentra con nosotros el doctor Modesto Seara Vázquez, rector del Sistema de Universidades Estatales de Oaxaca, presidente de honor y fundador de la Asociación Mexicana de Estudios Internacionales. Se encuentra también con nosotros la maestra María Teresa Solís Trejo, subsecretaria de Planeación y Política Turística de la Secretaría de Turismo. También nos acompaña el doctor Rafael Velázquez Flores, presidente de la Asociación Mexicana de Estudios Internacionales. Nos acompaña el doctor Alberto Lozano Vázquez, secretario general de la AMEI. Nos acompaña también el ingeniero Ramón Sinova Solís, delegado regional de Fonatur en Huatulco. Nos acompaña también el doctor Manuel Martínez Justo, director general de la Facultad de Estudios Superiores Acatlán de la Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México. Nos acompaña también el doctor Roberto Domínguez Rivera, profesor de Relaciones Internacionales de la Universidad de Suffolk. Nos acompaña también el doctor Thazha Varkey de la Universidad de McGill University. También nos acompaña la licenciada Nora Alicia Carrasco Arroyo, tesorera de la AMEI. Nos acompaña también la doctora Adriana Sletza Ortega Ramírez, directora ejecutiva de la AMEI. Nos acompaña también el maestro Isaac Flores Delgado, secretario de Organización y Difusión de la AMEI. Por favor, un fuerte aplauso. A continuación, le daré la palabra al doctor Rafael Velázquez Flores, presidente de la Asociación Mexicana de Estudios Internacionales.
Bien, muchas gracias. Solamente voy a hacer la introducción al doctor Roberto Domínguez, quien va a ser el moderador de la conferencia magistral de cierre, de clausura de este congreso. El doctor Roberto Domínguez es el vicepresidente de la Asociación Mexicana de Estudios Internacionales y actualmente tiene el cargo de cuidar las relaciones internacionales de la asociación con las diferentes instituciones que existen, como la International Studies Association, que nuestro invitado de honor para dar esta conferencia magistral fue presidente en el periodo anterior. Le cedo entonces la palabra al doctor Roberto Domínguez.
Buenas tardes. Han sido casi 10 años desde que hemos tratado de fortalecer la relación con otras organizaciones de relaciones internacionales, principalmente la International Studies Association, y creo que ya son 10 años que cada año tenemos al presidente en turno o al secretario ejecutivo de International Studies Association haciendo el closing o un keynote y estamos muy satisfechos con ello. Today we welcome TV Poll, and I guess the fact that for the past 10 years we have had all the presidents of ISA is even more meaningful today. TV Poll represents somehow not only a shift in the organization and understanding of international relations, but also a step towards the pluralization in our discipline. He mentioned in the keynote when he was appointed as president of the International Studies Association, can our discipline become the lead source of ideas for peaceful change? Or are we going to leave this element to a narrow group of politicians, their advisors, and diplomats alone, many of whom often lack the vision or historical understanding? And he ends this paragraph by saying the current low-quality debates among U.S. presidential candidates at this point. So somehow he reads how current events are evolving, and his concern about one of his main topics, which is peaceful change, somehow has been a very important contribution to the discipline of international relations. But this is relevant also for another reason. And the reason is because he has advocated plurality within the International Studies Association. One of the pioneers opening this road was our founder president, Modesto Ciara Vázquez. But we are pleased and glad to see that some other voices have come together in order to be more plural. And T.B. Paul was elected the 56th president of the International Studies Association in 2016, but also he had a predecessor who was Amitav Acharya, and somehow this indicates that from the standpoint of the International Studies Association, the largest association in the world in the field of international studies, something is changing, and we welcome that change. But not only that, let me say that the fact that he was appointed as president of the International Studies Association, in my view, I guess the second that was non-coming from a developed world, is extremely important because he has encouraged and he has been trying to open an agenda, trying to set up institutional change within International Studies Association. He was a contributor to the Presidential Task Force on the Global South, allowing members from underrepresented regions such as Africa, East Asia, South Asia, Southeast Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East to set up thematic sections within the International Studies Association. So his contribution to the field is not only in the scholarly world, but also in the institutional change in the way we understand our discipline. And we welcome this because the Mexican International Studies Association in many ways has advocated this agenda for decades. And Modesto Ciara is the best testimony of it. T.B. Paul is the James McGill Professor of International Relations in the Department of Political Science at McGill University. He was educated in Kerala, India. Later, he got his BA in New Delhi University and his doctoral degree at University of California in LA. He has been author of 16 books and more than 60 journal articles. He has made some contributions, and only just to depict a little bit his more recent agenda, in 2012, he published the book International Relations Theory and Regional Transformations. This book was published by Cambridge University Press, and it was a very interesting book because he brought the top-notch scholars in the field of international relations and asked the question, how can we understand regionalism and international relations at the same time? And this was a very important book showing the multi-causal pathways and trying to seek the connection between regionalism and international relations. In 2014, he published Status in World Politics, in which basically he's trying to analyze how different countries in the Global South are going to assume their status, their new status in a changing world. And later in 2016, he published Accommodating Rising Powers, Past, Present, and Future. And in this book, he tried to see how the dominant theories in international relations are dealing with change, and particularly the case of the rising powers. He's currently working in a book that he has titled Restraining Great Powers, Self-Balancing in World Politics. And his presentation today that he has titled Self-Balancing from Empire to the Global Era is based on that research. We are really pleased for all the reasons that I mentioned that you are here with us today, particularly a Global South scholar coming to the Global South and above all reinforcing an agenda that the Mexican International Studies Association has advocated for decades. Welcome, T.B. Paul. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everybody. Unfortunately, I do not speak Spanish, although I love hearing the sounds and everything. And I'm actually a big fan of Mexico, so it's my loss that I haven't picked up language skill yet. But I guess there is still time. I want to thank Roberto and Rafael in particular, who have been connecting with me for more than a year now about this meeting, and I have been looking forward to it. My predecessor, Amitabh Acharya, fondly remembers the coming here, and you have a tremendous group of scholars. And I was very impressed with the fact that this is perhaps the second largest grouping of IR scholars after ISA, which is tremendous. It shows how much you have achieved. But I think we need to tell the rest of the world this achievement a lot more. So I applaud your effort to create a section under ISA or something like that, and having more connections to our scholars from the global north and other global south countries. Mexico has a lot to offer in every field, and clearly we should not think in atomized world anymore. So I won't talk a lot more about all the dignitaries sitting here. Just to introduce this book project I have been working on, which is actually coming out of an article that I was part of it. I wrote an article, International Security, the journal from Harvard, 2005, on the subject of soft balancing. There were 3 other people, and it got a lot of debates and some rejections. People thought there's nothing there, sort of to make a theory out of it. But then I looked at diplomatic history, and I realized there is a lot more to this than the current period or post-Cold War period. So then I started to look at whether great powers in particular have been using this instrument to restrain their aggressive behavior. And I must say that they have been. The concert of Europe is starting point of my discussion. But as I was reading about great power behavior, I realized that they are the #1 killers of the world. You may be surprised from my rude statement there, but unfortunately, there is in the 21st century, after natural causes, like people die out of natural causes, what was the #1 source of death in the 21st century? It was bloody wars waged by great powers, okay? Great powers and their allies. And just look at the numbers. Some 109 million people died in the 2 global wars. And since the great power system merged in 1500 AD or so, 9 major wars have been fought between them. And so they not only fight among themselves, at least in the past, they also have engaged in proxy wars, and in this, Latin America included, some 40 million people in the developing world since the Cold War began, or during the Cold War. You had Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan twice, Iraq twice, caused millions of casualties. Now, several conflicts going on in the Middle East, obviously have great power imprint in them. And they not only fight these big wars, they're also very good in justifying their behavior. This is where the problem arises. They get a particular legitimacy. They give this impression they have this God-given right to inflict massive death on humanity, and the capacity to also to maintain international order. And our discipline is part of the problem. Our discipline has been justifying this behavior for a long period of time. They managed to keep the aura and legitimacy through what you call propaganda, institutional power, and sheer material power accrued through the last half millennium of European and then US, USSR, American-led world systems. But as Roberto was mentioning, who makes the decisions to go to war? This is where my blood boiled when I start reading all these wars. These decisions are made by a tiny group of men, mostly, who call upon their people to go and die because a social contract the citizens have signed up with the state. And among them, a lot of reckless leaders, including the current one in the United States. Sorry to be blunt on this. Even the liberal ones have reckless leaders reckless ideas, and they somehow think they can get away with it. This is the sad part of it. And we talk about liberalism as a source of peace. Yes, it has contributed immensely, and I'm a liberal. I'm also, I like liberal democratic ideas. But we have to be very careful when we say liberalism is all for peace. The wars and the conflict liberalism has caused and potentially can create have to be taken into account, and the wars that liberals or others use in the name of liberalism. Electoral politics and democracy. I was just watching the Vietnam War episodes in the PBS recently. In one of the episodes is a taped conversation between Nixon and Kissinger, where they are debating whether to bomb Laos and Cambodia or not. And Nixon says, think about it, Henry, elections, Henry, elections. Okay, this man is going to inflict thousands, actually hundreds and thousands of casualties on this very poor country in the name of his elections. And this is something we somehow forget about in our discourse. Now the question is, of course, in the contemporary world, we can't think of a great power war. Of course, they are not waging the same kind of war. But there is possibility for great power conflict rising. You have the rise of China, resurgence of Russia, and declining US, or if you want to call it declining, the Trump arrival, the dangers that he and his cohort pose to the world, policy drifts, reckless leaders and choices. And our theories in general predict that potentially we are going to have what you call a Thucydides trap moment. This is a Graham Allison project in Harvard. Thucydides trap, basically saying that the Athenian started the war thinking the Spartan growth. So this sort of fear of China's growth and where that will lead to. And so I won't go into all the theories that we have in IR, we have power transition to a number of theoretical positions that make the point that this war among great powers for supremacy has been a recurring feature of international politics, and it's going to repeat in some fashion or other. Of course, nuclear weapons and intensified globalization all have made quite a bit of difference. So I was looking at the different theoretical positions in international relations, and one of the most powerful theories, of course, is realism, which has this balance of power as its core theoretical position. And so I have studied this a little bit and tried to argue that the typical balance of power that realists talk about is sort of difficult to see in the contemporary world. The transformation of the world has to be taken into account, and what I notice is that balance of power itself is going through, the strategy is going through considerable changes. And so this sort of, our theory of balance of power comes out of European great power politics, and in the contemporary globalized world, this has to be changed. So two mechanisms have been talked about through internal balancing, through military buildup, states balance, through alignments, through external balancing, they create alliances, and that if they don't do that, their independence as nation states could go because the powerful has a temptation to take over the weak. And therefore, this comes out as a law-like phenomenon in international politics. And so there is debate whether they are talking about an outcome or a strategy. And so we have sort of categorized two approaches to balance of power. One is called hard balancing, where you go through these two techniques. The other is soft balancing. The question is, I'll come to soft balancing in a second, why we haven't had intense balance of power since the end of the Cold War. And that is what prompted us to write the articles to first. The United States emerged as a very powerful state after the Cold War ended, yet there was no coalition to balance against the United States. And so the question is whether it was a fluke or it was several conditions that emerged since the end of the Cold War. So I kind of list them here: the intense global economic globalization, the decline of territory as a source of wealth, the kind of new norms, Nationalism, yes, is there, but national self-determination. And the fact that military technology does not favor quick advance, and the threat environment, which is not very dangerous, at least for a period of time. And countries seem to be balancing against threats as opposed to balancing against power. So these background conditions or facilitating conditions have made balancing a very delicate act as well as strategy. So that doesn't mean that countries are just staying put, doing nothing about it. Countries are active and countries are engaging in soft balancing, which is kind of an eclectic approach, bringing institutional literature into the whole balance of power. And I think I'm connecting several strands of literature, including the English school, about legitimacy, which I'll talk in a minute. So what is soft balancing? Restraining the power of a state through international institutions, limited alignment, concerted diplomacy, periodic military exercises, economic sanctions, making its aggressive actions less legitimate in the eyes of the world, and hence its goals more difficult to obtain. So here we are talking about no active coalition building, military coalition, but informal coalitions. And so institutions, international institutions are key areas of soft balancing, and institutions have to be given this role that institutionalist theorists haven't given yet, the balancing role of international institutions, the restraining role of international institutions, because realists tend to reject institutions as epiphenomena of power politics. So the number of historical cases that I will be studying in this book already in the making, since the CONGRESO of Vienna, which ended the Napoleonic Wars, and the Vienna Congress has definite soft balancing implications. League of Nations after World War I, Japan and Italy were soft balanced, UN institutional use by non-aligned countries. Post-Cold War, you have Kosovo, Iraq as my examples. Regional ASEAN hedging, ASEAN is definitely the most important case. And then you have a number of other regional cases, including Latin America, where people have written articles, books about it. More hopefully will come. So what is the legitimacy role here? A great power is a great power because it has achieved the legitimacy the international system accords to that power. This is usually achieved through war and post-war settlement. So the contemporary system is set in San Francisco in 1945. It hasn't been altered since then. That's why the rising powers are trying to get into the Security Council. It's not feasible or easy. But where is this legitimacy? Comes from what is it? Legitimacy is tacit acceptance of social structure in which power is exercised. So it's being lawful. It's lawful for a power because it has the institutional legitimacy. And institutional legitimacy is something that is often given after post-war settlements. So what does it mean for the contemporary world? We have what you are witnessing in the contemporary world, countries have calibrating, including smaller states, different strategies to deal with these rising powers, especially China, Russia, and United States to a great extent. They have been hedging. China in particular, they have been engaging in sub-balancing in the Asia-Pacific region. And the US, the two cases, Kosovo invasion, Iraq, both were attempted soft balancing by second-ranking states, but did not succeed. Although later the US pulled out of these places under the Obama administration, and I argue that it was a case of soft balancing winning at the second stage. So there is some hope for the Trump era ending maybe differently. We have to influence the American public opinion. There's something called shaming in world politics, and this is exactly what Mr. Obama did. That he told the public, you know, the war has caused immense casualties, and not only that, it damaged America's reputation. And therefore, we need to change, we need to get out of there. And if that happens, Trump era will also come to an end, but may not be as easy as we all think. So here what is happening is limited coalitions are built without idea of military coalitions, and that countries have created what you call collective legitimation of the United Nations as the key arena of operation, veto power in particular. Now, I know I don't have a whole lot of time. Whether the big question arises whether soft balancing succeeds. These are some of the cases that I look into, or countries that have adopted soft balancing along with other strategies, and discuss in detail what do they do. And if you look at the balancing, it's very much this mixture of balancing happening. And so the book is all about this change in world politics. So first of all, you need a number of conditions. I already mentioned some of them for soft balancing to apply and to succeed, if at all they succeed. But the point is that it's not always easy, and sometimes they fail. Number one, how much legitimacy great powers accord to institutions. Unfortunately, once again, Trump does not help there, but United States does as a country, and if you talk to the diplomats, they say we do value institutions to give us legitimacy and power. And how they perceive institutional legitimacy. You don't want a great power completely disenchanted. So highly disenchanted revisionist power is bad for international order. And obviously, thank God that China is not such a state. It could potentially, but Russia is somewhat revisionist. Technology does not allow quick conquest. As historians would say, the arrival of the tank and the aircraft that allowed the Germans to think about blitzkrieg and expanding quickly. And you also need low levels of nationalism. Nationalism is a very powerful force, especially nativist nationalism, which is, again, unfortunately, we are seeing in the United States today. But I think the good thing about the US is one day the institutional structures will reassert. Again, I'm an optimist, so I keep saying this is potentially this possibility. High levels of economic interdependence and globalization era has allowed that. And so I've received quite a bit of criticism. This is simply a diplomatic positioning, posturing. It doesn't have a consistent policy. I argue that it is much more than that. It is a strategy. It also has an active policy device attached to it. And that success is not the only reason countries apply it. Nothing in world politics is guaranteed to be successes, okay? So hard balancing failed miserably. When hard balancing fails miserably, what happens? Thousands of people die in wars. So this is clearly, we cannot say that one strategy is all go for victory, other one is not. So these arguments, I developed several arguments, and then I tested these case studies, and I conclude that soft balancing will remain an important part of the contemporary world because we don't have a choice. If you go for hard balancing, for instance, against the United States today under Trump, what will he do? He's going to increase the military, he's going to spend more, which is what he's doing. So to restrain a country like United States, one may have to think of self-balancing more institutions, more restraints. And this is the Gulliver story, how to tie the big guy without being in the forefront of things. And I compare the soft law, soft power, all these are important. They are not precise, but they are very valuable. And soft balancing adds richness, broaden the balance of power debate, and better than doing nothing. It's like sanctions to some extent, and it adds flexibility, and we can still engage states in a peaceful manner. So soft balancing has value, and I don't want to put all the eggs into it because it may also fail. And what we are noticing, China's behavior today in Southeast Asia, it is trying to circumvent the soft balancing by buying off countries. The greatest example is the Philippines, which went to the International Court Tribunal on Law of the Sea, got a very positive, completely rejecting the Chinese case, yet the president comes back and then he softens his stand. So that's a soft balancing act they did, but small states are very vulnerable to bribing and, and we have a very unpredictable leader there at this point. So, but think about it, how other ways the Southeast Asian states can balance. And of course, if they balance in the emerging system, maybe they will use China as enemies or potentially enemies, United States, India, etc. But that need not bring peace to the region and economic prosperity, since China is a very important player in the regional order with its road and belt policy today. And therefore, we have to be more creative in international order. And this is, I already mentioned the dangers what your northern leader poses. But I think these dangers have always been there, whenever you have a very powerful state, and how to restrain normatively, how to restrain through institutions, how to restrain through discourse. How can we talk about peaceful change, respect for people and societies? Now the NAFTA thing is going on, and I live in Canada. You can sense the immense anxiety it is creating, what will happen to the economies. And I'm sure you have a lot more anxiety than I am in some sense. And so I'm just wanting to see that we need to return to institutions. We need to innovate institutions. We need to make institutions effective. Don't say that institutions somehow will do the job on themselves. This is a big mistake. Institutions decline, democracies decline, countries decline, economies decline. Social orders decline. Continuous human agency is needed to keep them alive and adapt. And our IR theory doesn't help there. Transformation is not one of the topics. Peaceful change is not one of the topics that we have dealt with sufficiently. We need to think on those lines if we want to be players rather than simply narrating what the European great powers have done in the past. So this is my book, Restraining Great Powers of Balanced Empires to the Global Era. The Yale University Press is supposed to publish it next year. And hopefully you will all read it and criticize me. I appreciate any comments, thoughts, and suggestions, and your points on various things I raised. Thank you so much. Maybe I'll sit there. Okay.
Sí, bueno, lo que de acuerdo al programa lo que haremos es hacer una ronda de preguntas. Podemos hacer 4 o 5 preguntas y el expositor TV Paul responderá a ellas. Entonces, si por favor son muy breves, el micrófono está ahí y si pueden alzar la mano y me moveré allá para traducir la pregunta.
Thank you for the presentation, Marcela Lopez from CIDE. It was very refreshing to hear a voice from the Global South talking about power. But my concern is that, well, you're framing your arguments and your books under a very state-centric approach. So how do we deal with soft balancing, if we can, under other frameworks, including other powerful actors, multinational companies, NGOs, so civil society, global civil society, in fact, the Global South, right? So my question is, can we get out of the state-centric approach to achieve peace? Thank you.
No, thank you, Mr. TV Paul. It was a very interesting topic you talked about. I'm Eduardo Palacios from People's Friendship University of Russia, and my question would be, what would you recommend in this thesis of soft balancing? What measures can the international community take to deal with the present situation in North Korea? Thank you.
Enio Hoyo from UDEM, Universidad de Monterrey. Paul, just two quick questions. First, hello? Yeah. When you put this list of recommendations for soft power, I was thinking most of them are actually under attack nowadays. I mean, there is a rising nationalism, not actually abandoning of nationalism. There is an abandoning of liberalism, economic liberalism, etc., towards protectionism. So is there actually a future for that soft power under the present conditions? And second, when you talk about international organizations, do you refer to global large organizations or are you referring to regional ones? How can we, in any case, coordinate the efforts of such a number of organizations, etc.?
Yeah. Thank you. They're very thoughtful questions. I'll take one by one very briefly. Yes, it is state-centric for this project. I am very much for social forces, but balance of power is very much state-centric, unfortunately. It's the states that make decisions, whether they need formal alliances, they create military alliances. But social forces have a lot to play if you want institutions to work. And that's where I think your point is well taken. The NGOs in global society can affect institutions a lot more than even their own states they can, and they do play a role in transforming state policies. And if you look at the way I mentioned the Obama arrival and the way kind of civil society has worked up to a point. But my effort in here is to be more focused because I know that if I include everything, it will become a good book on world peace, which could be coming in my next kind of effort. But I want it to be, because this concept deserves more attention and it definitely should get more focused analysis, and there was a lot of stuff to deal with, and the wars that I'm dealing with are very much state-caused wars, okay? So although I'm very much in favor of understanding non-state actors, and as global in particular, as I started off by saying, who makes the decisions to start wars? It's unfortunately a tiny cell of people. As the president in the United States case, the Iraq war was decided by George Bush and a bunch of men sitting close by in their operational room. And they could do a lot of damage to world order. Of course, we need to fight that force, but at that point in time, a lot of people protested, but they didn't give a damn about it. And they just went ahead and destroyed the regional order and a country that was functioning reasonably well. You know what that happened, what contributed to that. So I sympathize with you that, but I think next stage, if this research agenda has a future, it has to be actually the last question too, going into other regions, going into other roles that these non-state forces play, and whether we can think of transforming normatively in terms of legitimacy. Legitimacy is a big role then, and that's where legitimacy creators, who creates, who destroys, who recreates legitimacy, and global society forces will have a role to play. So I'm not antagonistic to the argument that was made. It was a very useful one, but I'm sure that's the next stage of research. Russia is a big part of my case study. In fact, if you look at the international community's response to Ukraine, Russia is actually both a target and a player in self-balancing. In the 2003 invasion and the Kosovo, Russia played a big role as a self-balancer. Okay? Russia used its veto power at the Security Council to make sure the resolutions are never passed. Institutional delegitimation, Russia played a big role, even with Germany and France at that time in 2003. But Russia is now target of self-balancing and hard balancing, by the way. Self-balancing through sanctions, European Union's cutting off a lot of, and the delegitimation of the occupation of, or accession of Ukraine, parts of Ukraine and Crimea. So even dealing with that, the Europeans find it very hard to apply hard balancing alone. They put all the NATO forces in the Baltic states, but if you look at the way they are dealing with it, is also delegitimizing their position through institutional means. European Union in particular, G7, it was G8, Russia was suspended, so that's a soft balancing act. And I do think that Russia does its own self-balancing with China and others. So there's a lot of this counter going back and forth is going on. The third question is, actually I deal with that very much in my, I'm very much conditional, my argument. I don't want to make an assertion that the world is progressively. I think in my speech also I mentioned things decline, rise and fall of ideas, institutions, states, economies. And we have a problem because we like progress, but what we see today is not progress in many parts of the world. And the illiberalism and the illiberal democracy and this strongman emerging in many of these countries, bringing us back. So, but self-balancing may be one way to, that's where the global forces, the social forces have to work to delegitimize the positions. This is not just the United States, by the way, it's Turkey, India. Under Modi, I come from India, and we are all very worried about where the country will end up, the democracy, the process. You have almost everywhere in the world now, except a few European countries, this process of even there, the right-wing forces are asserting winning more and more. And so we have a cycle happening now. I call it a cycle because if you read Immanuel Kant, you know, the perpetual peace, he is also talking about it won't be an easy travel, a journey towards this great perpetual peace he's talking about. It will take ups and downs, a lot of wars, bloody wars, and finally people will reach to that particular golden era. But that's kind of, you know, beyond the analysis here. The democratic peace literature has talked about that. But I do think that you are right in the sense, whether we cross a threshold or not in this era, whether globalization will completely fail, whether deglobalization will be like 1930s, whether nationalism will emerge among the core countries, whether they will use force to achieve their goals, whether the institutions they created all become irrelevant. All these are very important. And I do think that cycles do happen, and so that's why the human agency is very important, and some leaders do work, but not necessarily sufficient at this point. Yesterday, Mr. Obama and Mr. Bush came on the television. It was nice to listen to them in the sense, you need more of those key players to encourage the people to think and act against the current narrative that's going on, which is unfortunately not good. And they haven't been doing that sufficiently. That's, I don't know why, but it's like a tradition. The past presidents don't speak, but they have to. The last question you mentioned was whether we need to think about regional institutions. Yes, I have quite a bit of discussion of ASEAN. ASEAN has a code of conduct, you know, and China signed parts of it. Now they're still negotiating it. It hasn't prevented China's expansion to South China Sea or creation of these islands and islets. I'm sure there is examples of OAS in this Mercosur, and I haven't done enough studies, but I have seen articles, people writing about the regional institutions playing a kind of self-balancing role in some context. European Union played a big role in the 2003 Iraq war, delegitimizing. The European Union passed resolutions. So the most critical regional institutions have been playing a role. European Union, number one, and today European Union plays a big role with Russia in terms of how to, and even Turkey, and you know, there's a lot of things we can say and are not working, but clearly they are trying, you know. So I think this is a good area of, again, another book in terms of regional institutions and self-balancing, how they have succeeded or not, attempted, failed. And I think we have to keep an open mind, conditions under which if they succeeded. And this can be applied to regional rivals and rivalries and regional conflicts, disputes, crises, if they use institutions for delegitimizing aggressive behavior. I think that's sort of a logic, I would say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.